They called her a traitor before they ever asked if she was innocent. Lady Eveline Harrow stood in the center of the grand ballroom, surrounded by London's elite, as the Duke of Vane read her sentence aloud. His voice was cold, his eyes colder. The forged letter trembled in his hand. Proof, he said, of her betrayal. She reached for him, the man she'd once admired from afar and saw only contempt. Exile, he declared, and with that single word, her life shattered. Stay until the end to see if love can survive the cruelest betrayal. Drop your city in the comments and hit that like button. The chandeliers of Harrington House blazed with 1,000 candles, casting golden light across the marble floors where London's most powerful families danced, drank, and whispered. It was the event of the season, the midsummer ball, and Lady Eveline Harrow had never felt more alive. She stood near the tall windows overlooking the gardens, her emerald gown catching the light as she laughed at something Lord Pembroke's wife had said. Around her, the evening hummed with possibility. At 23, Eveline was at the height of her social power, beautiful, wealthy, well-connected, and most importantly, respected. Her late father, the Earl of Harrow, had left her a considerable fortune and a name that opened every door in the kingdom. "You're practically glowing tonight, Eveline," Lady Pembroke said warmly, adjusting her fan. "I dare say half the men here are plotting how to steal a dance." Eveline smiled, though her gaze drifted across the room. "I'm not interested in most of them." "Ah!" Lady Pembroke's eyes sparkled knowingly. "Still pining for the Duke, are we?" Heat crept up Eveline's neck. "I don't know what you mean." "Darling, everyone knows. You've been watching Alaric Vane for 2 seasons now. Not that I blame you. Those shoulders, that jaw, and the way he commands a room." She sighed dramatically. "Pity he's so dreadfully serious." Eveline's smile faded slightly. Duke Alaric Vane was indeed serious, ruthlessly so. As the king's chief enforcer, he was tasked with rooting out treason, corruption, and threats to the crown. He was brilliant, decisive, and utterly without mercy. People feared him. Eveline, foolishly perhaps, admired him. She'd seen glimpses of something else beneath that iron exterior, a flash of dry humor during a political debate, a moment of unexpected kindness toward a servant. She told herself she saw the man others missed. "He's dedicated to the kingdom," Eveline said quietly. "There's honor in that." "Honor, yes. Warmth, no." Lady Pembroke patted her hand. "But who am I to discourage a romantic? Just don't let him break your heart, dear." Before Eveline could respond, a ripple of movement swept through the ballroom. Conversations died. Heads turned. Duke Alaric Vane had arrived. He stood at the top of the entrance stairs, tall and commanding in his black formal coat. His dark hair swept back from a face carved from granite. His gray eyes scanned the room with the precision of a hawk searching for prey. Even in celebration, he looked like a man at war. Beside him stood 2 members of the king's guard, their expressions grim. Eveline's stomach tightened. Something was wrong. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alaric's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Forgive the interruption. I'm here on the king's business." A murmur of unease spread through the crowd. The king's business at a ball? Unprecedented. Alaric descended the stairs slowly, his boots echoing on marble. The crowd parted before him, bombs. His gaze swept the room and locked onto Eveline. Her breath caught. He was walking toward her. "Lady Eveline Harrow," Alaric said, his voice carrying across the ballroom, "by order of His Majesty, you are hereby summoned to answer charges of high treason." The world tilted. Gasps erupted around her. Lady Pembroke clutched her arm. Someone dropped a glass, the shatter impossibly loud in the sudden silence. "What?" Eveline breathed, unable to process the words. That's impossible." Alaric stopped 3 feet away. Up close, his eyes were chips of winter ice. "Is it? Then perhaps you can explain this." He pulled a folded letter from his coat and held it up. Even from a distance, Eveline recognized the Harrow family seal pressed into the wax. "This letter," Alaric continued, his voice hard and flat, "was intercepted 2 days ago en route to enemy agents in France. It contains detailed intelligence about the king's military movements, supply routes, and the names of undercover operatives. It is signed in your hand, Lady Harrow, and sealed with your family crest." "No." Eveline shook her head, her heart hammering. "No, I never—" "The evidence is undeniable." Alaric's expression didn't change. "You have betrayed your king and your country." "I didn't write that." Her voice rose, desperate. "Someone forged it. Please, you have to listen." "I've spent 3 days investigating," Alaric cut her off. "The handwriting matches samples of your correspondence. The seal is authentic. Multiple witnesses confirm you had access to the information contained within." He paused, and for just a moment something flickered in his eyes. Regret, perhaps, or disappointment. "I wanted to be wrong, Lady Harrow, but the facts are clear." Eveline felt the room spinning. This couldn't be happening. Not here. Not now. Not from him. "Please." She stepped forward, her voice breaking. "Alaric, please. You know me. I would never—" His jaw tightened. "I know what the evidence shows." "Damn the evidence!" Tears burned her eyes. "I'm telling you the truth. Someone is framing me. You have to investigate further." "I have investigated." His voice dropped, cold and final. "And I have reached my judgment." The finality in those words hit her like a physical blow. "No," she whispered. Alaric turned to address the room. "Lady Eveline Harrow is found guilty of treason against the crown. By the authority vested in me, she is stripped of her titles, properties, and rights. She is hereby sentenced to permanent exile in the Northern Territories, effective immediately." The ballroom erupted. Voices overlapped. Shock, outrage, vindication. People Eveline had known for years stared at her as if she were a stranger, a monster. Lady Pembroke backed away, her face pale with horror. "Take her," Alaric said to the guards. "No." Eveline grabbed his arm. "Alaric, look at me. Look at me. You know me. I've never lied, never schemed. Does that mean nothing?" For one brief moment, their eyes met, and in his gaze she saw something that made her heart crack. Certainty. He believed her guilty, completely, utterly, without doubt. "I thought I knew you," Alaric said quietly. "I was wrong." The guard seized her arms. Eveline struggled, but it was useless. They dragged her toward the entrance as the crowd parted, faces twisted with disgust and fascination. "You're making a mistake," she screamed, her voice raw. "I'm innocent." No one listened. As they hauled her out into the night, Eveline caught one last glimpse of the ballroom, the chandeliers, the beautiful people, the life she'd known, and of Alaric Vane, standing alone in the center of it all, his face a mask of stone. Then the doors slammed shut. The journey north was a nightmare. They didn't even let her return home to pack. The guards threw her into a sealed carriage with nothing but the clothes on her back, the emerald gown now torn and filthy, her dancing slippers ruined. For 3 days they traveled without stopping, the roads growing rougher, the landscape bleaker. Eveline barely slept. Her mind spun in endless circles, trying to make sense of what had happened. The letter, the seal, the handwriting. Someone had done this to her. But who? And why? She'd always been careful to stay out of political intrigue. Her father had taught her that much before he died. "Keep your head down, your reputation clean, and your name honorable," he'd said. "That's how you survive in this world." She'd followed his advice. She'd never taken sides in court disputes, never traded secrets, never made enemies. Or had she? Eveline racked her memory for anyone who might hate her enough to orchestrate this. Lord Hastings, whose marriage proposal she'd rejected? Lady Cynthia Verwood, who'd been jealous of Eveline's popularity? Sir Marcus Trent, who'd lost money in a business deal with her late father? None of it made sense. Forging a treason letter required access to her handwriting, her seal, and intimate knowledge of royal intelligence. It wasn't the act of a spurned suitor or a petty rival. This was calculated, professional, and it had worked perfectly. By the time they reached the northern estate, Eveline was numb. The carriage stopped in front of a crumbling stone manor, half swallowed by overgrown vines and surrounded by bare, windswept fields. This was Greystone Hall, her family's forgotten northern property, abandoned for 2 generations. It looked like a tomb. "Out!" one of the guards grunted. Eveline climbed down on shaking legs. The wind cut through her thin gown, carrying the scent of ice and decay. In the distance, she could see a small village, a handful of rough cottages with smoke rising from their chimneys. "This is your new home," the guard said flatly. "You're not permitted to leave the Northern Territory. If you attempt to return south, you'll be executed. Understood?" Eveline didn't answer. She was staring at the manor, at the broken windows and sagging roof. "Understood?" the guard repeated, harsher. "Yes," she whispered. They left her there. Just rode away without another word, disappearing down the dirt road until even the sound of hoofbeats faded. Eveline stood alone in the cold. Then, finally, she let herself cry. Great, racking sobs that tore through her chest and left her gasping. She cried for her ruined reputation, her stolen future, her shattered dreams. She cried for the life she'd lost and the man she'd foolishly trusted. When the tears finally stopped, the sun was setting. The temperature was dropping fast. Eveline wiped her face and looked at the manor again. She had two choices: curl up and die, or survive. She chose survival. The first week was hell. Greystone Hall was barely habitable. The roof leaked in 3 places. Most of the windows were broken. The furniture had rotted or been stolen. There was no food, no firewood, no supplies. Eveline spent the first night huddled in a corner of the least damaged room, wrapped in moth-eaten curtains she'd torn down for warmth. She'd never been so cold in her life. Every sound made her jump, the wind howling through broken shutters, animals scurrying in the walls, the creak and groan of the old structure settling. She didn't sleep. At dawn, she forced herself to move. Sitting still meant freezing. She explored the manor room by room, cataloging what was salvageable. A few chairs, a table with 3 legs, a fireplace that might work if she cleaned out the bird nests. In the kitchen, she found a rusted knife and a cracked pot. It was something. The village was a 20-minute walk across the frozen fields. Eveline steeled herself and made the journey, ignoring the way her dancing slippers fell apart with every step. The villagers stared at her like she was a ghost. She couldn't blame them. She must have looked insane. A noble woman in a torn ball gown, her hair wild, her feet bleeding, stumbling into their little market square. "I need food," Eveline said to the first person she encountered, an old woman selling bread. "Please, I can pay." She stopped. She had no money, no jewelry, nothing. The old woman's expression hardened. "You're the traitor, aren't you? The one they exiled." Word traveled fast, apparently. "I'm not a traitor," Eveline said quietly. "But yes, I'm at Greystone Hall." "Then you're not welcome here." The woman turned her back. Eveline tried 3 more vendors. All refused to serve her. By the time she reached the village tavern, she was shaking from cold, hunger, and the crushing weight of rejection. The tavern keeper, a burly man named Thomas Breen, at least looked at her. His expression was hard, but not cruel. "I know who you are," he said, "and I know what they say you did." "I didn't do it," Eveline said, "but I understand if you don't believe me. I need help. Please, I'll work. I'll do anything." Breen studied her for a long moment. "You ever mucked out a stable?" "No." "Hauled water? Scrubbed floors?" "No." "Then what good are you?" Eveline's throat tightened. "I can read and write. I can do arithmetic. I can teach." Something shifted in Breen's expression. "Teach?" "Yes." She straightened, grasping at the lifeline. "I had the best tutors in London. Literature, history, mathematics, languages. I could teach the village children." Breen was silent, then he sighed. "There's no school here. Most of the kids can't even write their names. Parents work too hard to teach them." "Then let me," Eveline said. "Please. I'll teach them for food, for firewood, for anything." Breen scratched his beard. "You'll freeze to death before winter's over in that old ruin." "Probably," Eveline admitted, "but I'd like to try not to." Despite himself, Breen almost smiled. "You've got spine, girl. I'll give you that." He turned and called into the back of the tavern. "Mary, bring some bread and cheese." A woman emerged carrying a small bundle wrapped in cloth. She looked at Eveline with suspicion, but handed it over. "That'll keep you alive a few days?" Breen said. "There's a farmers' meeting tonight. I'll talk to them about the teaching idea. No promises." "Thank you," Eveline whispered. "Thank you." She hurried back to Greystone Hall, clutching the food like treasure. That night she ate half the bread and cheese, saving the rest. She used the knife to pry boards off a collapsed shed outside and dragged them inside for firewood. By the time she got a small fire going, her hands were bleeding and her body ached in places she didn't know could hurt. But she was warm, and she had food. It was more than she'd had that morning. The villagers agreed to let her teach. Not because they trusted her, they didn't, but because education was valuable and they had no other options. Eveline started with 6 children in the corner of the tavern, ages 5 to 12. Their parents paid her in whatever they could spare: eggs, potatoes, firewood, cloth. It was brutal, humbling work. The children were bright but had never been taught structure. They didn't know how to sit still, how to focus. Eveline had to learn patience she'd never needed before. She made alphabet cards from scraps of paper. She taught math using stones and sticks. She read them stories from memory, acting out the parts until they giggled. Slowly, impossibly, it worked. The children learned. And Eveline, in teaching them, began to rebuild herself. She repaired Greystone Hall one piece at a time. She patched the roof with salvaged wood. She stuffed rags into broken windows. She scrubbed decades of grime off the floors until her knuckles bled. The manor would never be beautiful again, but it became livable. The villagers slowly began to thaw. They saw her working in the fields during harvest, hauling water from the well, chopping firewood in the freezing rain. They saw her teach their children with a patience and care they'd never expected from a disgraced noblewoman. They saw her survive. Respect, grudging and hard-won, began to grow. By the end of the first month, Eveline had 12 students. By the end of the second, 18. Parents who'd once refused to look at her now nodded in the street. Thomas Breen became something like a friend. He brought her supplies accidentally, left at the tavern, and stayed to talk. Carefully neutral conversations about weather and crops, never about London or her past. One night, as snow began to fall, he asked the question she'd been dreading. "Did you really do it?" Eveline looked up from the sock she was darning. They were sitting in the tavern after hours, the fireplace crackling between them. "No," she said simply. "I didn't." Breen nodded slowly. "I believe you." "Why?" "Because anyone guilty wouldn't be here, breaking their back to survive. They'd have run. Or given up." He poured her a cup of weak tea. "Someone set you up good." "Yes," Eveline said. "They did." "You know who?" "No." She stared into the fire. "But I know who condemned me without asking." Breen didn't need to ask who she meant. The memory of Alaric's face, cold, certain, unmoved by her pleas, haunted her. In the long, dark nights at Greystone Hall, she replayed that moment over and over. The way he'd looked at her, the way he'd dismissed her so completely. She'd admired him once, foolishly thought she saw something in him worth caring for. Now she knew the truth. Alaric Vane was exactly what everyone said. A man of iron and ice, incapable of doubt or mercy. He judged her in 3 days and condemned her without hesitation, ignoring her pleas because evidence mattered more than truth. The betrayal cut deeper than the exile. Because somewhere in her heart, Eveline had believed, stupidly, desperately, that he would save her, that he would see through the lies. He hadn't even tried. "Hate's a heavy thing to carry," Breen said quietly. "I don't hate him," Eveline lied. Breen just looked at her. "Fine," she admitted. "Maybe I do. But what good does it do? He's in London, powerful and untouchable. I'm here, forgotten." "Maybe," Breen said. "But you're not dead. And you're not broken." Eveline managed to smile. "Not yet." Winter came hard. The Northern Territories were brutal even in mild years. And this was not a mild year. Snow fell in relentless waves, burying the village under drifts that reached the rooftops. Temperatures plunged. Livestock died. Supplies dwindled. Eveline's students stopped coming. It was too dangerous to travel. She spent long stretches alone at Greystone Hall, rationing food, huddling near the fire, and battling the isolation that threatened to swallow her whole. Some days she wondered if it would have been easier to give up, to walk into the snow and simply stop. But something stubborn in her refused. She thought about the children, waiting for spring to resume their lessons. She thought about Thomas Breen, who'd taken a chance on a traitor. She thought about the villagers who'd slowly, carefully, begun to see her as a person rather than a crime. And she thought about Alaric Vane standing in that ballroom, so certain of her guilt. "I'll prove you wrong," she thought fiercely, even though he'd never know. "I'll survive this. I'll rebuild. And someday, somehow, the truth will come out." It was a fantasy. She knew that. But it kept her alive. Spring arrived like a promise. The snow melted. Green shoots pushed through the frozen ground. Birds returned. And with them, so did Evelyn's students. On the first day of classes, 23 children showed up. Eveline stood in the doorway of the newly repaired schoolroom, a corner of the tavern Thomas had helped her partition off, and felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. "All right," she said, smiling at the eager faces. "Let's begin." They worked through the morning, reading, writing, simple mathematics. The children soaked it up like spring rain. When lessons ended, parents arrived with small gifts: fresh bread, eggs, a repaired pair of boots. "For the teacher," one mother said shyly. Eveline accepted with gratitude that made her chest ache. That evening, as she walked back to Greystone Hall, she passed the village square. A group of men were gathered around a messenger on horseback, rare in these parts. "London," the messenger was saying. "Big news from the capital." Eveline's steps slowed. "What news?" Thomas Breen asked. "Duke Vane's been investigating something," the messenger said. "Some kind of conspiracy. Word is he's turning the court upside down looking for evidence." Eveline's heart stopped. "What kind of conspiracy?" another villager asked. The messenger shrugged. "Don't know details, but people are saying the Duke's obsessed. Hasn't slept in weeks according to the rumors. Must be something serious." The conversation moved on, but Eveline stood frozen. Alaric was investigating. It meant nothing. It couldn't mean anything. He'd condemned her months ago. Whatever he was chasing now had nothing to do with her. But as she walked home through the twilight, something shifted in her chest. A crack in the certainty she'd built around her heart. And in London, 300 miles away, Duke Alaric Vane sat in his study, surrounded by documents, his gray eyes bloodshot and haunted. On the desk before him was a letter, a real one this time, found hidden in the belongings of a minor clerk who died in a suspicious accident. The handwriting was almost perfect. Almost, but not quite. Alaric stared at it until the words blurred. Then he whispered into the empty room, "What have I done?" The crack in Alaric's certainty had begun 3 weeks earlier in the most unremarkable way possible. He'd been reviewing trade manifests, routine paperwork that normally required nothing more than his signature. But something had caught his eye. A minor inconsistency in a shipping log dated 2 days before Eveline's letter had supposedly been written. It shouldn't have mattered. It was a single discrepancy in thousands of documents. But Alaric Vane had built his reputation on noticing what others missed. The shipping log recorded a delivery to the Harrow London residence on a date when Eveline had been documented at 3 separate social events across the city. She couldn't have received the intelligence contained in the treasonous letter because she hadn't been home when it was allegedly delivered. Alaric had stared at that log for an hour. Then he'd pulled every piece of evidence from Eveline's case and spread it across his study floor. Now, 3 weeks later, his study looked like a madman's den. Documents covered every surface, maps plastered the walls. Alaric hadn't slept more than 2 hours a night since he'd started, surviving on coffee and the gnawing dread growing in his gut. Because the more he looked, the more things didn't add up. "Your Grace," his secretary, Mr. Pemberton, ventured from the doorway. "The King's Council meeting begins in an hour. You're expected to present the quarterly security report." "Cancel it," Alaric said without looking up. He was comparing 2 handwriting samples under a magnifying glass. "Sir, I cannot cancel a royal summons." "Then tell them I'm ill." "You've said that 3 times this month." Pemberton stepped carefully into the room, navigating the sea of papers. "Your Grace, forgive my boldness, but people are starting to talk. You look terrible. You haven't been seen in public since I destroyed an innocent woman's life?" Alaric's voice was sharp as broken glass. Pemberton fell silent. Alaric set down the magnifying glass and rubbed his burning eyes. The letter, the one that convicted Lady Harrow. Who examined the handwriting? Sir Walter Grayson, the royal examiner. He confirmed it matched her hand. Get him! Now! It's past midnight, Your Grace. I don't care if it's dawn. Get him! Pemberton hesitated, then bowed and retreated. Alaric turned back to the documents. The handwriting match had been the cornerstone of the conviction, irrefutable proof, Grayson had said, but as Alaric compared Evelyn's known correspondence with the treasonous letter, he saw it. A microscopic difference in the pressure of certain pen strokes, the angle of specific letters, details so small that a standard examination would miss them entirely, unless you were looking for deception. The forger had been exceptional, nearly perfect. But nearly was the crack in the wall, and Alaric was good at finding cracks. An hour later, a bleary-eyed Sir Walter Grayson arrived, his wig askew. Your Grace, this is highly irregular. Did you personally examine Lady Harrow's letter? Alaric demanded. Grayson blinked. Of course. I provided testimony at her trial. Look again. Alaric thrust the documents at him. Compare these sections. Tell me what you see. Grayson adjusted his spectacles and bent over the papers. Minutes passed. His frown deepened. The baseline pressure is different, he murmured. And here, the loop on the G is slightly wider in the original samples. I didn't notice before because the variance is so minimal. His face paled. Your Grace, are you suggesting that someone with extraordinary skill forged this letter? Yes. Alaric's voice was cold as winter. Someone who had access to multiple samples of her handwriting. Someone who knew exactly what intelligence to include to make it credible. Someone with resources and connections. But the seal can be replicated if you have the original, Alaric cut him off, or if you have someone on the inside who can provide a wax impression. Grayson looked shaken. If this is true, if Lady Harrow was falsely convicted, then I sent an innocent woman into exile. Alaric's jaw clenched, and the real traitor is still free. The weight of those words hung in the air like smoke. What do you need from me? Grayson asked quietly. Discretion, Alaric said, and a full forensic re-examination. If I'm right, someone went to extraordinary lengths to frame Lady Harrow. They're powerful, they're careful, and if they discover I'm investigating, they'll disappear. Grayson nodded slowly. I'll begin immediately. But, Your Grace, why? Why would anyone target Lady Harrow specifically? She had no political enemies, no strategic value. Yet, that was the question that haunted Alaric. I don't know, he admitted, but I'm going to find out. After Grayson left, Alaric stood at his window, staring out at the London night. Somewhere in the darkness, a conspiracy was buried. And somewhere 300 miles north, Eveline Harrow was surviving an exile she didn't deserve. The thought made something crack in his chest. He'd condemned her without hesitation. He'd seen the evidence and stopped looking. He'd been so certain, so arrogantly confident in his judgment, that he'd ignored the most important question of all. Why? Why would a woman with everything, wealth, status, respect, commit treason? He should have asked. He should have dug deeper. Instead, he'd destroyed her with the same ruthless efficiency he brought to every case. I'm sorry, he whispered to the empty room, but apologies meant nothing if he couldn't prove her innocence. Alaric turned back to his desk, lit another candle, and kept working. But, In the Northern Territories, Eveline was fighting a different kind of battle. Spring had brought hope, but it had also brought trouble. The village of Greymont had survived on subsistence farming for generations, but this year's planting season was a disaster. The ground was too wet from the heavy winter snows, and cold snaps kept killing the early crops. Food stores from last year were nearly depleted. People were getting desperate, and desperate people needed someone to blame. Eveline heard the grumbling in the market, saw the hostile glances. The fragile acceptance she'd built was cracking. Old suspicions resurfaced. The traitor living in their midst. The cursed noblewoman who'd brought bad luck to their village. It's not rational, Thomas Breen told her as they stacked firewood outside the tavern, but fear makes people stupid. They think I'm the reason for the crop failures, Eveline said flatly. Some do, not all. He paused. But there's a meeting tonight. Village council. They're discussing options. Options for getting rid of me, you mean? Thomas didn't deny it. Eveline's hand stilled on the firewood. 6 months ago, she would have crumbled at this news. Now she felt something different rising in her chest. Not fear, anger. I've worked myself to the bone for this village, she said quietly. I've taught their children. I've helped with the harvest. I've asked for nothing but the chance to survive. I know, Thomas said, and so do most people. But Harold Grimm's been stirring up trouble. Harold Grimm. The village's largest landowner, a bitter man who'd opposed Eveline's teaching from the start. He had political ambitions, wanted to be appointed regional magistrate, and saw Eveline as a liability. What's he saying? That you're dangerous, that the crown exiled you for a reason, that we're harboring a criminal who could bring royal punishment down on all of us. Thomas met her eyes. He's going to demand the council force you out. I have nowhere else to go, Eveline said. If they exile me from here, I'll die. I know. That's why you need to come to the meeting tonight. Speak for yourself. Make them see you as a person, not a symbol. Eveline's throat tightened. Will they even let me in? If I have anything to say about it, yes. That evening, Eveline walked to the village hall with her spine straight and her head high. Inside, 20 villagers sat on rough benches, their faces ranging from sympathetic to hostile. Harold Grimm stood at the front, tall and barrel-chested, his beard bristling. Ah, he said when Eveline entered, the guest of honor. Harold, Thomas Breen warned. She has a right to be here, said Margaret Whitfield, the midwife who'd helped Eveline learn to preserve food last winter. This meeting concerns her. It concerns all of us, Grimm shot back. And I say we've been too lenient. We took in a convicted traitor who was never given a fair trial, Eveline interrupted. The room went silent. Grimm's eyes narrowed. You dare. I dare to speak the truth, Eveline said, stepping forward. Her heart hammered, but her voice stayed steady. I was convicted based on a forged letter. I never had the chance to present evidence or call witnesses. Duke Vane sentenced me in 3 days based on fabricated proof. Fabricated, Grimm scoffed. Convenient claim. It's the truth. Eveline looked around the room, meeting as many eyes as she could. I know most of you don't believe me. I don't expect you to, but I've been here 6 months now. You've seen how I live. You've seen me work. Do I seem like a traitor? Do I seem like someone who betrayed her country? You seem like someone with something to hide, Grimm said coldly. I have nothing to hide. Eveline's voice rose. But you, Mr. Grimm, seem very eager to cast me out. Why? What do you gain from my exile? Grimm's face reddened. I gain safety for this village. You gain the removal of someone who threatens your control, Eveline countered. You don't want me teaching the children because educated people ask questions. They challenge authority. They don't blindly follow men like you. Gasps rippled through the room. Grimm took a threatening step toward her. How dare you? Enough! Thomas Breen moved between them. This isn't helping anyone. She's right, though, said a quiet voice from the back. Everyone turned. It was Jacob Whitfield, Margaret's husband, a farmer who rarely spoke at meetings. The children are learning, Jacob continued. My daughter can write her name now. She's reading stories. That's something I could never give her. He looked at Grimm. Maybe that scares you, Harold, but it doesn't scare me. Nor me, added another farmer. My son wants to be a clerk in the city someday, said another woman. Because of Lady Harrow, he thinks that's possible. Grimm's expression darkened. You're all fools. She's manipulating you. By teaching our children, Margaret Whitfield stood. By fixing that bridge over Miller's Creek last month when no one else would? By sitting up all night with the Brennan family when their baby had fever? The room murmured with recognition. Eveline had done all those things, and more, not for gratitude, but because they needed doing. The crops are failing because of weather, Harold, Margaret continued. Not curses, Not bad luck. Weather. And if you want to cast someone out for that, then you're the fool. Grim looked around the room, realizing he was losing. His face twisted with rage. Fine, he spat. Keep your pet traitor, but when the crown comes asking questions, when soldiers arrive wondering why we're harboring a criminal, don't say I didn't warn you. He stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The room exhaled collectively. Thomas turned to Eveline. That could have gone better. Despite everything, Eveline almost laughed. It could have gone much worse. The vote was taken. 16-3 in favor of allowing Eveline to stay. As people filed out, several stopped to squeeze her hand or murmur support. Margaret gave her a fierce hug. You've got spine, girl. Fine, girl, the midwife said. Don't let that bastard Grim break it. I won't, Eveline promised. But as she walked home through the dark, she knew this wasn't over. Grim was humiliated and angry, a dangerous combination. He'd find another way to come at her. She just didn't know how. The answer came a week later in the form of 3 royal soldiers. They arrived at dawn, their horses' hooves thundering through the quiet village. Eveline was in the schoolroom preparing lessons when she heard the commotion outside. Her blood went cold. She stepped into the street to see soldiers questioning Thomas Breen at the tavern entrance. Behind them, Harold Grimm stood with his arms crossed, satisfaction written across his face. Lady Eveline Harrow? The lead soldier called out. Eveline forced herself to stay calm. I'm here. The soldier approached, hand on his sword hilt. We're here on behalf of the regional magistrate. There's been a formal complaint that you're violating the terms of your exile. What? Eveline's stomach dropped. How? By teaching, the soldier said. Your sentence specified isolation and labor. Education of the populace constitutes political activity, which is forbidden to exiles. Eveline looked at Grim. Understanding dawned. He'd found a technicality, a legal loophole to destroy her. She's been teaching children to read. Thomas Breen stepped forward. There's nothing political about that. The law is clear, the soldier cut him off. Exiles are forbidden from positions of authority or influence. Teaching qualifies. That's absurd, Margaret Whitfield shouted from the growing crowd. She's helping these children. The law is the law, ma'am. The soldier turned to Eveline. You have 2 choices, Lady Harrow. Cease all teaching activities immediately or face additional punishment. What kind of punishment? Eveline asked quietly. Transfer to the labor camps in the far north. Hard labor until death or royal pardon. The crowd erupted in protest. The labor camps were notorious, brutal work in sub-zero temperatures, minimal food, guards who treated prisoners like animals. Few survived more than a year. You can't, Thomas started. We can and will if she doesn't comply, the soldier said. Those are the magistrate's orders. Grim stepped forward, barely hiding his grin. Perhaps the lady should have considered consequences before breaking the law. Eveline looked at the soldier, then at the crowd of villagers, people she'd come to care for, children who depended on her, and felt the trap close around her. If she stopped teaching, the children lost their only chance at education. If she continued, she'd be sent to die in the camps. When do you need my answer? She asked. Now, the soldier said. The crowd fell silent. Eveline's mind raced. There had to be another way, some solution Grim hadn't considered. Then it hit her. The law says exiles can't hold positions of authority, she said slowly. But does it say I can't work for someone else, as their employee? The soldier frowned. What do you mean? If someone in the village employed me as a tutor, privately, in their home, that wouldn't be a position of authority. I'd be a servant. And servants are allowed to teach, aren't they? The soldier hesitated. That's technically correct. No, Grim snarled. That's not... Who would employ her? The soldier asked the crowd. I would, Thomas Breen said immediately. And I, Margaret added. We all would. Jacob Whitfield stepped forward. We'll form a committee, hire her officially, pay her wages. She works for us, not over us. The soldier looked uncertain. I'll need to verify this with the magistrate. Then verify it, Thomas said firmly. But until you have orders saying otherwise, Lady Harrow is employed by the Greymont Village Education Committee. Legally. The soldier clearly didn't like it, but he had no ground to argue. Fine, but I'll be back if there are further complaints. He and his men mounted their horses and rode off. Grimm's face was purple with rage. This isn't over. Yes, it is, Margaret said coldly. You tried to kill her, Harold. We all saw it. Now get out of our sight before I forget I'm a healer and do something unforgivable. Grimm looked around at the hostile faces and realized he'd lost more than the battle. He'd lost the village's respect. He turned and stalked away. Eveline sagged against the tavern wall, her legs shaking. That was brilliant, Thomas said. How did you think of it so fast? Desperation, Eveline admitted, and the memory of a contract dispute I witnessed in London 5 years ago. Same principle. Well, it saved your life, he grinned. Welcome to your new position as official teacher of the Greymont Village Education Committee. The pay is terrible, but the benefits include not dying. Eveline laughed, a real, genuine laugh that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. I'll take it. The villagers crowded around her, offering congratulations and support. Children hugged her legs. Parents thanked her. For the first time since her exile began, Eveline felt something she'd thought lost forever. She felt like she belonged. 300 miles south, Alaric's investigation was reaching a critical point. He'd spent 6 weeks following the trail of the forged letter, pulling threads one by one. The clerk who'd died suspiciously had been paid by someone using a false name. The handwriting expert Grayson had found evidence of professional forgery. The seal had been copied using a technique that required access to the royal archives. Slowly, a picture was forming. Someone inside the government had orchestrated Eveline's downfall. Someone with power, connections, and a motive Alaric still couldn't identify. Then he found the second letter. It was hidden in a lockbox in the dead clerk's apartment, discovered during a routine inventory of his effects. The lockbox had been sealed with wax and tucked behind a loose brick in the wall, clearly meant to be found only if someone looked very carefully. Alaric broke the seal with hands that shook. Inside was a letter addressed to my lord. The Harrow matter is resolved, it read. The girl suspects nothing. Her exile removes the obstacle as planned. Payment as agreed. It was signed with the clerk's name, but more importantly, it referenced an obstacle. Eveline hadn't been targeted randomly. She'd been in someone's way. But why? How? Alaric spread out everything he knew about Eveline Harrow: family background, social connections, financial holdings. Then he saw it. 6 months before her exile, Eveline's late father's estate had finalized its records. Among the holdings was a small shipping company, barely profitable, practically worthless, except that shipping company had exclusive contracts for several northern trade routes that a certain ambitious merchant consortium had been trying to acquire for years. Trade routes that would be worth a fortune if the northern territories opened for expanded commerce, which the king was considering. Alaric pulled the consortium's charter. The primary investor was Lord Hastings. Secondary investors included 3 council members and, his blood went cold, Sir Marcus Trent, the royal intelligence officer who'd provided the evidence of Eveline's treason in the first place. Pemberton! Alaric shouted. His secretary appeared instantly. Your Grace? Get me every document related to northern trade contracts from the past 2 years, and get me a meeting with the king tonight. Sir, it's nearly midnight. Tonight, Alaric repeated. This can't wait. Because he finally understood. They'd framed Eveline to steal her inheritance. They'd destroyed an innocent woman's life for money and trade routes. And Alaric had been their weapon, wielded with perfect precision. The realization made him physically ill. He'd condemned Eveline without investigating because he'd trusted the intelligence sources. He'd trusted Marcus Trent. He'd been a fool. Your Grace? Pemberton looked worried. Are you all right? No, Alaric said honestly, but I will be, once I fix this. He grabbed his coat. Where are you going? To wake the king, Alaric said, and then to destroy everyone who did this. The king received him in his private study, dressed in a nightgown and looking thoroughly annoyed. This better be worth interrupting my sleep, Vane. It is, Your Majesty. Alaric spread the documents across the desk. I have evidence that Lady Eveline Harrow was falsely convicted of treason. The real conspirators are members of your own government." The king's expression changed from irritation to shock as Alaric laid out everything he'd found: the forged letter, the dead clerk, the trade route motive, the consortium. When he finished, the king was silent for a long moment. "Marcus Trent," he finally said. "My intelligence officer." "You're certain?" "Beyond doubt, Your Majesty. He fabricated evidence and used me to convict an innocent woman." The king's face darkened. "That's treason. Real treason." "Yes, sir." "And the others? Hastings? The council members?" "All complicit. They targeted Lady Harrow because she inherited something they wanted and wouldn't sell." The king stood and paced to the window. "This is a disaster. If it becomes public that we convicted an innocent noblewoman—" "With respect, Your Majesty, she is innocent. The disaster is that she's suffered 6 months of exile for a crime she didn't commit." The king turned sharply. "Don't lecture me, Vane. I'm aware of the injustice." "Then pardon her," Alaric said. "Immediately, publicly. Restore her name, her title, her properties." "It's not that simple." "Yes, it is." Alaric's voice was hard as iron. "You sign the pardon. I arrest the conspirators. We make this right." "And what about the political fallout? The questions about how this happened? The damage to the government's credibility?" "Is less important than justice," Alaric said flatly. The king studied him. "You've changed, Vane. The man who convicted Lady Harrow wouldn't have said that." "The man who convicted Lady Harrow was arrogant and blind," Alaric said. "I'm trying to be better." Another long silence. Then the king nodded. "Draft the pardon. I'll sign it. But Vane, you're the one who'll face her. You're the one who'll have to explain how this happened." "I know, Your Majesty." "And you're the one who'll have to live with what you did to her." Alaric's jaw clenched. "I know that too." The king returned to his desk and picked up his pen. "Then let's begin making this right." As Alaric left the palace an hour later, pardon in hand and arrest warrants issued, dawn was breaking over London. The city was waking up, unaware that by nightfall, several powerful men would be in chains. And 300 miles north, Eveline Harrow was teaching verb conjugations to a room full of children, still believing she'd been forgotten by the world. That was about to change. The arrests began at dawn. Sir Marcus Trent was taken from his bed, still in his nightclothes, protesting loudly as royal guards dragged him through his mansion. Lord Hastings tried to flee through a servant's entrance, but was caught before he reached his carriage. The 3 council members involved were arrested simultaneously during an emergency meeting they'd called to discuss containing the situation. By noon, all 5 conspirators were locked in the Tower of London. By sunset, the news had exploded across the capital. Alaric stood in the tower's interrogation chamber, watching Marcus Trent through the bars. The intelligence officer sat hunched on a wooden bench, his face gray with fear and fury. "You can't prove anything," Trent said hoarsely. "It's speculation." "I have the clerk's letter," Alaric interrupted. "The one detailing the payment. I have the shipping contracts showing your consortium's attempted purchases. I have handwriting analysis proving the forgery. I have testimony from the sealmaker you bribed." He stepped closer to the bars. "I have everything, Marcus, and you're going to hang for it." Trent's face crumpled. "You don't understand the northern roots, the profit potential. Hastings said it was a victimless crime. She was just some noblewoman who'd never miss. She was innocent." Alaric's voice dropped to something dangerous. "And you destroyed her life for money." "You destroyed her life," Trent shot back, finding a spark of defiance. "You're the one who condemned her, Vane. You're the one who sent her into exile without a second thought. Don't put this all on me." The words hit like physical blows, because Trent was right. "You're correct," Alaric said quietly. "I did, and I'll carry that for the rest of my life. But you orchestrated this. You forged evidence, you committed treason, and now you'll face justice." He turned to leave. "She'll never forgive you," Trent called after him. "Even if you clear her name, even if you restore everything, she'll never forgive what you did to her." Alaric paused at the door. "I know," he said. "I don't deserve forgiveness." He left Trent in the darkness and climbed back into the London night. The city was in chaos. News of the conspiracy had spread like wildfire. People gathered in taverns and squares are arguing about what it meant. Could the government be trusted? How many other innocents had been falsely convicted? Who else was involved? Alaric pushed through the crowds to the palace, where the king was preparing to make a public statement. But before that could happen, there was one more thing Alaric had to do. He had to go north. He had to face Eveline. The pardon was official, signed and sealed with the royal crest. Alaric carried it in his coat pocket as his carriage raced through the night, changing horses every few hours to maintain speed. He brought 4 guards, not for protection, but as witnesses. This had to be done properly, publicly, irrefutably. The journey took 3 days. 3 days for Alaric to rehearse what he would say. 3 days to imagine the look on Eveline's face when she saw him. 3 days to accept that whatever punishment she dealt him, he deserved it. The northern landscape changed as they traveled. The manicured estates and rolling hills giving way to rocky terrain, dense forests, and finally the harsh, windswept plains of the frontier. Greymont village appeared on the horizon like a cluster of stones against the gray sky. "This is it, Your Grace," the driver called down. Alaric's stomach tightened. "Stop at the tavern first. I need to speak with the locals." The carriage pulled up outside the Hound and Hare just as the sun reached its peak. Villagers stopped what they were doing to stare at the expensive carriage bearing the royal crest. Whispers started immediately. Alaric stepped down, acutely aware of how out of place he looked. His fine clothes, his polished boots, everything about him screamed wealth and power in a place where survival was the only currency that mattered. Thomas Breen emerged from the tavern, wiping his hands on his apron. His eyes narrowed when he recognized Alaric. "You," he said flatly. "You've got some nerve showing your face here." "I'm looking for Lady Eveline Harrow," Alaric said. "Are you now?" Thomas's voice was cold as winter. "Come to finish the job? Exile wasn't enough?" "I came to restore her." Alaric pulled out the pardon. "She's innocent. She's been pardoned by the king." The gathered crowd went silent. Thomas stared at the document, his expression shifting from hostility to shock. Innocent? The evidence was forged. There was a conspiracy. Members of the royal government framed her to steal her inheritance. Alaric's voice carried across the square. "She never committed treason. I convicted an innocent woman, and I'm here to make it right." "Make it right," Thomas repeated slowly. He stepped closer, and Alaric saw the rage simmering behind his eyes. "You destroyed her. You stood in that ballroom and condemned her without mercy. You sent her here with nothing. She nearly died that first winter. She froze. She starved. She broke herself rebuilding a life you took from her." His voice rose. "And now you think a piece of paper makes it right?" "No," Alaric said honestly. "Nothing makes it right. But she deserves to have her name restored. Her title, her properties, her future." "What she deserves," Thomas said, "is an apology you're not worthy to give." Before Alaric could respond, a woman's voice cut through the tension. "Thomas, that's enough." Margaret Whitfield pushed through the crowd, her weathered face stern. "Where is she?" she asked Alaric. "I was hoping you could tell me." "She's at Greystone Hall." Margaret studied him with sharp eyes. "Teaching the afternoon class. But if you think you can just walk in there and—" "I don't think anything," Alaric interrupted. "I know I have no right to her forgiveness. But I owe her the truth, and I owe her this pardon. Will you take me to her?" Margaret and Thomas exchanged looks. "I'll take you," Margaret said finally. "But Thomas is coming too. And if you upset her, if you cause her one more moment of pain, we'll throw you out ourselves, Duke or not." "Understood." They walked through the village, the crowd trailing behind like a parade. Alaric saw the poverty, the hard scrabble existence, the evidence of brutal winters and harder lives. This was where he'd sent Eveline. To this. Greystone Hall appeared ahead, still weathered but clearly repaired. Smoke rose from the chimney. Through a window, Alaric could see figures moving. Children, he realized. "She rebuilt it herself," Margaret said, following his gaze. "Every board, every stone. She had nothing when she arrived. Less than nothing. But she survived." The words were an accusation Alaric couldn't refute. They approached the front door. Inside, he heard Evelyn's voice. And that's why the verb tense has to match the subject. Can anyone give me an example? Children's voices responded eagerly. Margaret knocked. The voices inside stopped. Footsteps approached. The door opened. Evelyn stood framed in the doorway, and Alaric's breath caught. She'd changed. The elegant London lady he remembered was gone. This woman wore a simple wool dress, her hair tied back practically, her hands work-roughened. She was thinner, harder, carved down to something essential. But her eyes, those hadn't changed. They were still sharp, still intelligent. And when they landed on Alaric, they filled with something he'd never seen before. Fury. "You," she breathed. "Lady Harrow." "Don't." Her voice was deadly quiet. "Don't call me that. You stripped me of that name, remember?" Behind her, children peeked around her skirts, curious and confused. "I need to speak with you," Alaric said. "I have nothing to say to you." "Evelyn, please, get off my property." "I have a royal pardon," Alaric said quickly. "You're innocent. The conspiracy has been exposed. I'm here to restore your name." Evelyn went completely still. For a long moment, she just stared at him. Then she laughed. It was a terrible sound, bitter and broken. "A pardon," she repeated. "After 7 months. After you destroyed everything I had, everything I was. Now you bring me a pardon. The men who framed you have been arrested. I don't care." Her voice shook. "I don't care about them. I care that you, the man I admired, the man I thought had honor, you condemn me without hesitation. You didn't ask questions. You didn't investigate. You saw evidence, and you stopped looking because it was easier to believe I was guilty than to consider you might be wrong." Every word was a knife. "You're right," Alaric said. "Everything you're saying is true. I failed you. I was arrogant and blind, and I destroyed an innocent woman's life. There's no excuse for what I did. But I'm trying." "Trying?" Evelyn's control broke. "You're trying?" "I tried to survive the first winter. I tried to earn enough food to not starve. I tried to rebuild a life from nothing while carrying the weight of your judgment every single day." Tears streamed down her face. "Do you know what it's like to be called a traitor by everyone you meet? To have children spit at you? To have your own countrymen treat you like poison?" "No," Alaric said quietly. "I don't." "Then don't tell me you're trying. You can't possibly understand what you took from me." The children behind her had started crying, frightened by her anger. Margaret gently ushered them back inside. Evelyn wiped her face roughly. "Why are you here? Really?" "To give you this." Alaric held out the pardon. "And to tell you the truth, you were targeted because of your father's shipping contracts. A merchant consortium wanted them. They framed you to take control of your estate. I was their weapon. They fed me false evidence knowing I'd act on it without question. And I did exactly what they expected." Evelyn took the document with shaking hands. She read it slowly, her expression unreadable. "The king has restored everything," Alaric continued. "Your title, your properties, your assets. The conspirators are in the tower awaiting trial. Your name is cleared." "My name," Eveline said softly. She looked up at him. "Is that what you think this is about? My name?" "I think it's about justice. It's about you," she cut him off. "You and your guilt. You're not here for me, Alaric. You're here for yourself, to ease your conscience, to prove you're not the monster who destroyed an innocent woman." The accuracy of that statement made Alaric flinch. "Maybe that's part of it," he admitted. "But I also came because you deserve to know the truth. You deserve to have your life back." "My life?" Evelyn's laugh was hollow. "I don't have a life to go back to. My friends abandoned me. My reputation is ruined. Pardon or not, people will always whisper. And the person I was in London, she's dead, Alaric. You killed her." "Then let me help you build something new." "I don't want your help." Her voice cracked. "I don't want anything from you. You took everything, and now you think you can just give it back like nothing happened? Like we can move forward?" "No," Alaric said. "I know we can't. I know there's no moving forward from this, but I'm asking, begging, for the chance to make amends, in whatever way you'll allow." Evelyn stared at him for a long moment, Then she shook her head. "Leave," she said quietly. "Take your pardon. Take your guards. Go back to London and leave me alone." "Eveline," I said leave. She stepped back and started to close the door. "I won't give up," Alaric said desperately. "I'll prove to you that I've changed. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to earn—" "I don't want your life," Eveline shouted. "I want mine back, and since you can't give me that, there's nothing you can offer me, nothing you can say, nothing you can do. You're too late, Alaric, far too late." She slammed the door. Alaric stood on the steps, the sound echoing in his chest like a death knell. Thomas stepped up beside him. "She told you to leave, so leave." "I can't," Alaric said. "Not until she accepts the pardon, not until her name is publicly restored. She doesn't want—" "It doesn't matter what she wants," Alaric interrupted. "The pardon is law. Her title is restored whether she accepts it or not. The question is whether she returns to London or stays here." "Then that's her choice," Margaret said firmly, "not yours." "I know." Alaric turned to face them both. "But I'm not leaving until she makes it. Even if she refuses to see me, even if she hates me, I'm staying until this is finished." "You'll be waiting a long time," Thomas said. "I've got time." Tuts. Alaric took a room at the tavern. Thomas refused at first, but relented when Alaric offered to pay triple the normal rate and promised to help with repairs. The guards set up camp outside the village, and Alaric settled into an existence that felt like penance. He fixed the tavern's broken shutters. He helped Thomas repair the leaking roof. He worked in silence, aware that the villagers watched him with suspicion and hostility. He didn't blame them. Eveline refused to see him. For 3 days, Alaric tried. He went to Greystone Hall each morning and was turned away by Margaret or Thomas or one of the other villagers who'd appointed themselves Eveline's protectors. He left messages. He left supplies, food, books, materials for the school. Everything was returned unopened. On the 4th day, Margaret finally spoke to him. "She's not going to forgive you," the midwife said bluntly. They were standing outside the hall, the afternoon sun casting long shadows. "You need to understand that." "I do understand," Alaric said. "Do you? Because you're still here, still trying. Like if you work hard enough, do enough good deeds, she'll forget what you did to her." "I know she won't forget. I don't want her to forget. I just want—" He struggled for words. "I want her to know that I see her, that I understand what she survived, that I respect the woman she's become." Margaret's expression softened slightly. "The woman she's become is stronger than the girl you destroyed, but that strength cost her. Don't mistake survival for forgiveness." "I'm not. I just—" Alaric broke off as riders appeared on the horizon. A dozen men on horseback, riding hard toward the village. Thomas emerged from the hall, his face grim. "That's Grimm, and he's brought friends." Harold Grimm and his riders thundered into the village square. The men with him were rough types, hired muscle from the mining towns farther north. They all wore weapons openly. "Well," Grimm said loudly, dismounting, "look who's come crawling back, the Duke himself." Alaric stepped forward. "What do you want, Grimm?" "What I want is for you nobles to stop meddling in our lives." Grimm gestured to his men. "We heard about the pardon, about how the traitor's suddenly innocent. Funny how that works, rich people changing the rules to suit themselves." "The rules didn't change," Alaric said coldly. "Lady Harrow was falsely convicted. The real criminals have been arrested." "Convenient story," Grimm spat. "But we don't want her here anymore. Pardoned or not, she's brought nothing but trouble. So she can go back to London with you, and we can go back to peace." "She's not going anywhere," Thomas said, stepping up beside Alaric. "That's not your decision, Breen." "It's not yours either," Margaret added, joining them. More villagers were gathering, forming a loose circle around the confrontation. Alaric noticed that many carried tools that could double as weapons: shovels, hammers, pitchforks. "This is getting out of hand," one of Grimm's men muttered. "Shut up." Grimm focused on Alaric. "Here's how this works, Duke. You take your royal pardon and your pet traitor and leave. Tonight, or things get ugly." "Are you threatening a member of the royal court?" Alaric's voice dropped to something dangerous. "I'm protecting my village from troublemakers." Grimm's hand moved to his sword. "Both kinds." The square went silent. Alaric was acutely aware that this could turn violent very quickly. Grim had a dozen armed men. The villagers had numbers but no training. People would die. "Stand down," Alaric said quietly. "All of you. This doesn't need to—" "You're right," a voice called out. "It doesn't." Everyone turned. Eveline stood at the edge of the square, still wearing her teaching dress, her hair windblown. She walked forward with her chin up and her shoulders back, every inch the noble woman despite her rough clothing. "Eveline, don't—" Margaret started. "I'll handle this." Eveline stopped in front of Grim. "You want me gone? Fine. I'll leave." "No," Thomas said. "You don't have to—" "Yes, I do." Eveline's voice was calm but carried across the square. "Because this isn't about me anymore. It's about all of you, and I won't let you fight each other because of me." "Finally," Grim sneered. "Some sense from—" "But," Eveline interrupted, "I'm not leaving until I finish what I started. The children need to complete their term. That's 6 more weeks. After that, I'll go, peacefully." "That's not—" "6 weeks," Eveline repeated firmly. "That's my offer. Take it or leave it. But if you try to force me out before then, these people will fight you, and you'll lose." Grim looked around at the gathered villagers, men and women who'd picked up tools and formed a protective ring around Eveline. His hired men shifted nervously. 6 weeks, Grim said finally. "Then you're gone. Both of you." He pointed at Alaric. "And if either of you cause any more trouble, deal's off." He and his men rode off. The square exhaled collectively. Eveline immediately turned and walked away, heading back to the hall. Alaric followed. "Lady Harrow, I did that to stop a fight," she said without turning. "Not for you. Don't mistake it for forgiveness." "I know, but—" She spun to face him. 6 weeks, Alaric. That's all I'm asking for. Give me 6 weeks to finish teaching these children, to leave them with something valuable. Then I'll accept the pardon. I'll return to London. I'll play whatever role the king needs me to play to restore my name. But until then, stay away from me." "I can't," Alaric said. "The moment word spreads that you're pardoned, people will come looking, journalists, politicians, people who want to use you for their own purposes. You need protection." "I don't need anything from you." "You need someone standing between you and the wolves." Alaric stepped closer. "Let me do that. Let me protect you. Not because you forgive me, I know you don't, but because it's the one thing I can actually do." Eveline studied him. Something flickered in her eyes, calculation perhaps, or resignation. "Fine," she said. "But we have rules. You don't speak to me unless necessary. You don't interfere with my teaching. You stay out of my way. Understood?" "Understood." "And Alaric?" Her voice dropped. "If you break these rules, if you cross any line I set, I will make you leave. I don't care if you're the Duke or the King himself. This is my space, my life. You're here on my terms." "Yes," Alaric said simply. "Whatever you need." Eveline nodded once, then went inside. Alaric stood in the fading light, feeling the weight of her conditions settle over him like chains. But he'd take chains over exile. He'd take her anger over her absence. 6 weeks. He had 6 weeks to prove he'd changed. It wasn't enough time. It would never be enough time. But it was all he had. The news reached London before the week was out. The papers exploded with the story. The Duke of Vane personally delivering a pardon to the falsely exiled Lady Harrow. The conspiracy. The arrests. The scandal rocking the government. In the capital, people rioted. They demanded accountability, answers, justice for anyone else who might have been falsely convicted. The king made speeches. Parliament convened emergency sessions. The 3 council members tried to blame everything on the dead clerk and Marcus Trent, who maintained his innocence even as evidence buried him. The trial was set for 3 weeks' time, and every journalist in England wanted to interview Lady Eveline Harrow, the victim at the center of the storm. They started arriving in Greymont within days. Alaric intercepted them at the village boundary. He gave short, formal statements confirming Lady Harrow's innocence and pardoning, then sent them away with a clear message. She would not be giving interviews. Anyone who attempted to harass her would answer to him personally. Most took the hint. A few tried anyway. Alaric had his guards escort them out. He became a fixture in Greymont, not welcome, but present. He helped with village repairs. He purchased supplies from London and had them delivered quietly. He stood guard outside Evelyn's classroom, turning away anyone who tried to interrupt her teaching. He watched her from a distance and saw what she'd built. The children adored her. She was patient, creative, genuinely invested in their learning. She'd organized a small library with donated books. She'd started a program teaching the older children trade skills, reading contracts, writing business letters. She'd created something meaningful from nothing, and Alaric had almost destroyed it without even knowing it existed. The guilt was crushing, but he pushed through it, focusing on the work, protecting her, making sure she could finish what she started. They barely spoke. Evelyn kept her distance, and Alaric respected it. But sometimes, late at night when he couldn't sleep, he'd see her light burning in Greystone Hall and wonder what she was thinking. If she hated him as completely as she should, if some small part of her understood that he'd been manipulated too, though that didn't excuse what he'd done. 3 weeks passed in tense silence. The trial in London ended with convictions for all 5 conspirators. Marcus Trent was sentenced to hang. The others received life imprisonment. Evelyn's properties were fully restored, her accounts unfrozen, her name officially cleared. The king sent a personal letter inviting her to return to court with full honors. Evelyn read it without expression and set it aside. 2 weeks left. Then the final complication arrived. A royal envoy came with an official summons. Lady Eveline Harrow was required to appear before Parliament to give testimony about the conspiracy. Her presence was mandatory. She had 1 week to return to London. Alaric watched Evelyn's face as she read the summons, saw the flash of something like panic before she controlled it. "I can ask for an extension," he said. "Give you time to finish." "No." Evelyn folded the summons carefully. "It's fine. The children have learned enough. We can end early." "You said 6 weeks." "I said what I needed to say to prevent violence." She met his eyes. "I always knew it wouldn't last. This was borrowed time." "Then let me help you prepare. London will be overwhelming. The press, the politicians. I can handle it," Evelyn said firmly. "I know you can, but you shouldn't have to do it alone." For a long moment, they stared at each other. Then Evelyn sighed. "Fine. You want to help? Then help me tell the children. They deserve to know I'm leaving, and they deserve to hear it properly." The next day, Evelyn gathered all her students in the classroom. 28 children sat on benches, their faces bright with expectation. "I have something to tell you," Evelyn began. Her voice was steady, but Alaric saw her hands trembling slightly. "I'm going to have to leave sooner than planned." Immediate protests erupted. "But you said, we haven't finished." "Please don't go." Evelyn held up her hand for silence. "I know, and I'm sorry, but the king has summoned me to London. I have to give testimony about what happened to me. It's important." "Will you come back?" a small girl named Anna asked. Evelyn's expression cracked for just a moment. "I don't know, sweetheart." "But who will teach us?" an older boy asked. "You'll teach each other," Evelyn said. "And I'm leaving you all the books and materials. Margaret has agreed to help coordinate lessons. You're all smart enough to keep learning on your own." The children looked devastated. "Before I go," Evelyn continued, "I want each of you to know something. When I came here, I had nothing, no hope, no future. But you gave me purpose. You gave me a reason to survive. Teaching you has been the greatest honor of my life." Several children were crying now. "You can do anything," Evelyn said fiercely. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Don't let anyone limit you because of where you're from or who your parents are. You're brilliant and capable, and you deserve every opportunity. Promise me you'll remember that." "We promise," the children chorused. Evelyn handed out the books, one to each child, with a personal note she'd written inside. Then she hugged them, one by one, whispering encouragement and wiping tears. When the last child left, Evelyn sat at her desk and put her head in her hands. Alaric stood in the doorway, unsure if he should speak. "They deserved better," Evelyn said without looking up. "They deserved consistency, a real teacher who would stay." "They had you," Alaric said quietly. That was more than most of them ever expected. It wasn't enough. It was everything. Eveline finally looked at him. Her eyes were red but fierce. This is your fault, all of it. The children losing their teacher, the village losing their school, me leaving before I was ready. Your mistakes set all of this in motion. I know. And you expect me to what? Thank you for fixing it? No, Alaric said. I expect you to hate me. I deserve your hatred. Eveline stood. I don't hate you, Alaric. That's the worst part. I want to hate you. It would be so much easier. But instead, I'm just tired. Tired of being angry. Tired of fighting. Tired of all of it. She walked past him, toward the door. We leave tomorrow, she said. Be ready at dawn. Then she was gone. Alaric stood alone in the empty classroom, surrounded by chalk dust and the ghosts of lessons taught. He looked at the small library Eveline had built, the alphabet cards on the walls, the careful organization that spoke of someone who cared deeply about her students. This was what he'd almost destroyed. Not just a woman's life, but the lives she'd touched. The good she'd done. The hope she'd built in a place where hope was scarce. The weight of it settled over him like a mountain. Tomorrow they would return to London. Eveline would face Parliament, reclaim her life, and step back into a world that had betrayed her. And Alaric would stand beside her, protecting her from the wolves. It was the least he could do. It would never be enough. The journey south felt like traveling backward through time. Every mile brought Eveline closer to the world that had cast her out, and with each passing hour, she felt the armor she'd built in the north beginning to crack. She sat across from Alaric in the carriage, the silence between them heavy as stone. He hadn't tried to speak since they'd left Greymont at dawn, respecting the boundaries she'd drawn, but his presence was impossible to ignore. Through the window, she watched the landscape transform from harsh frontier to cultivated farmland to, finally, the outskirts of London. The city rose on the horizon like a promise and a threat, spires and smoke, wealth and memory. Eveline's hands tightened in her lap. We can stop, Alaric said quietly, if you need time. I don't need time. I need this to be over. It will be. Parliament will hear your testimony, you'll be officially restored, and then what? Eveline turned to him. I go back to society, attend balls, pretend the last 8 months didn't happen, pretend I'm the same person. No one expects that. Everyone will expect exactly that. Her voice sharpened. They'll want the innocent victim who suffered nobly. They'll want me grateful and gracious and willing to forgive. They'll want a story that makes them feel better about what happened. Alaric held her gaze. What do you want? The question caught her off guard. No one had asked her that, not the king, not Parliament, not even Thomas and Margaret before she'd left. They'd all assumed they knew, restoration, justice, return to her old life. I want, Eveline said slowly, to tell the truth. All of it. Not the sanitized version that protects reputations and saves face. The real truth about what exile was like, about survival, about the people who helped me and the people who tried to destroy me. She paused. Even if it makes them uncomfortable, then that's what you should do. The king won't like it. The king asked for testimony. He'll get it. Alaric leaned forward slightly. Eveline, you have power now, more than you realize. You're not the disgraced exile anymore. You're the wronged noblewoman everyone's talking about. Use that. Say what needs to be said. Something in his tone made her study him more carefully. You've changed, she said. Yes. The man who condemned me would never encourage rebellion against the court. The man who condemned you was a fool, Alaric said bluntly. I was so focused on following evidence, maintaining order, protecting the system that I forgot the system only matters if it serves justice. You taught me that. I didn't teach you anything. You survived exile with more integrity than I showed with all my power. That's a lesson, whether you intended it or not. Eveline looked away, uncomfortable with the honesty in his voice. It was easier when he was cold and distant, when he fit the monster she'd built in her mind during those brutal winter nights. This version of Alaric, humbled and sincere, was harder to hate. The carriage rolled through London's streets. People stopped to stare at the royal crest, and Eveline realized word had spread. The crowd outside her townhouse, returned to her by order of the king, was massive. Reporters, curious onlookers, well-wishers holding signs. "We'll go around back," Alaric said immediately, signaling the driver. But Eveline stopped him. "No, front entrance. The crowd will see me arrive." She straightened her spine. "I won't hide. Not anymore." The carriage stopped in front of the townhouse. Guards moved to clear a path, but the moment Eveline stepped down, the crowd erupted. "Lady Harrow! Are the rumors true? Will you testify against Trent? How does it feel to be vindicated?" Eveline raised her hand, and remarkably, the crowd quieted. "I will answer your questions," she said clearly, "after I give testimony to Parliament. Until then, I ask for your patience and your respect." She walked through the parted crowd with her head high, Alaric a silent presence at her shoulder. Inside the townhouse, servants rushed forward, her old staff, maintained by the estate manager during her exile. Mrs. Hendricks, the housekeeper, burst into tears at the sight of her. "Lady Eveline, oh, my dear girl, we hoped." "I'm all right, Mrs. Hendricks." Eveline hugged the older woman. "I'm home." But as she said it, the word felt foreign. This grand house with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers, its wealth and comfort, it didn't feel like home anymore. Home was a drafty manor with patched windows. Home was a classroom full of children. Home was the northern territories she'd left behind. "Your rooms are prepared," Mrs. Hendricks said, dabbing her eyes. "And there are letters, hundreds of them. Invitations, apologies, requests for audiences. I've sorted them by urgency." "Thank you." Eveline glanced at Alaric. "I'll need a few hours to prepare for tomorrow." He nodded. "I'll be in the study if you need anything. And Eveline, Parliament will be hostile. Some members are implicated in the conspiracy. Others simply don't like being proven wrong. Don't let them intimidate you." "I won't." Alone in her bedroom, redecorated exactly as she'd left it, Eveline stood at the window overlooking the garden. 8 months ago, she'd looked out this same window, dreaming of a future filled with possibility. That girl seemed impossibly naive now. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Hendricks entered with a visitor. "Lady Pembroke to see you, miss." Eveline stiffened. Lady Pembroke, who'd backed away from her in horror at the ball, who'd let her be dragged away without protest. The woman who entered looked smaller than Eveline remembered. Older. She clutched a handkerchief and wouldn't meet Eveline's eyes. "I know I have no right to be here," Lady Pembroke began. "After what I did, what I didn't do, but I had to tell you how deeply sorry I am. I was a coward. When you needed friends, I abandoned you." Eveline said nothing. "I believe the evidence," Lady Pembroke continued, her voice breaking. "Everyone did. But that's no excuse. I should have questioned it, should have defended you, should have done something." She finally looked up. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed you to know that I'm ashamed. Deeply, horribly ashamed." It would have been easy to dismiss her, to hold on to the anger and hurt. But Eveline had learned something in the North. Holding grudges required energy she couldn't spare. "I appreciate your apology," Eveline said carefully, "but you need to understand something. The woman you knew doesn't exist anymore. I'm not the same person who went to balls and worried about dance cards. That version of me died in exile." "I know," Lady Pembroke whispered. "I can see it. You're stronger, fiercer." "I had to be. To survive." Eveline moved to the door. "If you want to make amends, support me tomorrow. When I testify, when I tell the truth and people don't like it, can you do that?" "Yes." Lady Pembroke straightened. "Yes, I can." After she left, more visitors came. Former friends offering apologies, distant relatives expressing support, political allies positioning themselves for favor. Eveline received them all with cool politeness, committing none to memory, trusting none completely. That evening, Alaric knocked on the study door where she'd retreated to review Parliament's questions. "I brought dinner," he said, holding up a tray. "Mrs. Hendricks said you haven't eaten." Eveline wanted to refuse, but her stomach betrayed her with a growl. She gestured him in. They ate in silence for several minutes. Then Alaric spoke. "I've been thinking about your testimony tomorrow, about what you said in the carriage, telling the real truth. Second thoughts about encouraging rebellion. No, but I wanted to warn you. If you speak honestly about the conditions of your exile, about the brutality of the system, you'll make enemies, powerful ones. Good. Eveline set down her fork. The system deserves enemies. I agree. But those enemies will come for you. They'll try to discredit you, undermine you, paint you as ungrateful or vindictive. Let them try. Alaric smiled slightly. You've become dangerous. I've become honest. There's a difference. She studied him. Why are you helping me? Really? Is it just guilt? He was quiet for a long moment. At first, yes, guilt drove everything, but now, he met her eyes. Now I'm helping because I believe in what you're trying to do, because I think your voice matters, because the person you've become, that fierce, unbreakable woman, she deserves to be heard. Eveline's throat tightened. Don't. Don't what? Don't say things like that. Don't make this complicated. It's already complicated, Alaric said softly. It's been complicated since the moment I realized I'd destroyed someone who never deserved it. I can't, Eveline said, standing abruptly. I can't think about this. Not now. Tomorrow I have to face Parliament, and I need to be focused. I need to be strong. You are strong, stronger than anyone I've ever met. Stop, her voice cracked. Please stop. Because if you keep saying these things, I'll start believing you mean them, and I can't afford to believe in you, Alaric, not after what you did. The pain in her voice cut deeper than any accusation. I understand, Alaric said quietly. He moved to the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I do mean them. Every word. He left her alone. Eveline sat back down and put her head in her hands. The walls she'd built around her heart were cracking, and she hated it. Hated that part of her wanted to believe him. Hated that despite everything, some foolish corner of her soul still responded to his presence. She couldn't afford weakness. Not now. Tomorrow would be the fight of her life. Parliament assembled at noon. The gallery was packed with journalists, nobles, and curious spectators. Eveline sat in the witness chair, aware of hundreds of eyes on her. She wore a simple but elegant dress, refusing the elaborate court gowns Mrs. Hendricks had suggested. She wouldn't play the delicate victim. The Lord Chancellor presided, his expression stern. Lady Eveline Harrow, you are called before this assembly to provide testimony regarding the conspiracy that led to your false conviction of treason. Do you swear to speak truthfully? I do. Then please, in your own words, tell us what happened. Eveline took a breath. She'd rehearsed this moment 100 times in her mind. Now, facing the reality of it, she felt strangely calm. 8 months ago, she began, I was convicted of treason based on forged evidence. I was sentenced to exile without a proper trial, without the opportunity to present witnesses or challenge the accusations. I was sent north with nothing, no money, no supplies, no support. I was 23 years old, and I was left to die. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The northern territories are brutal, Eveline continued. The first month I nearly froze to death in a manor with no heat, no food, and no way to survive. The villagers refused to help me because I'd been branded a traitor. I had to beg for scraps. I had to work manual labor I'd never learned. I had to rebuild myself from nothing. Lady Harrow, one Parliament member interrupted. Lord Ashford, an older man with ties to the conspiracy, though he'd escaped prosecution. While your suffering is regrettable, surely you understand the Crown acted on the best available evidence. The Crown acted on lies. Eveline cut him off. The room went silent, and everyone in this chamber who participated in my conviction, everyone who saw that evidence and never questioned it, shares responsibility for what happened to me. Gasps erupted. You cannot speak to Parliament this way, Ashford started. I can, and I will. Eveline's voice rang out clear and strong. Because I survived what you did to me. I survived through strength and determination and the help of people you've never heard of, common villagers who showed me more compassion than any noble in this room. And now I'm here to tell you that your system is broken. The Lord Chancellor banged his gavel. Lady Harrow, you will show respect. I will show honesty, Eveline said. You asked for my testimony. Here it is. The conspiracy that framed me was possible because no one questioned authority. Duke Vane presented evidence, and everyone accepted it without investigation because it was easier than challenging a powerful man. She turned to look directly at Alaric, seated in the witness gallery. His face was pale, but his eyes steady. Duke Vane destroyed my life with 3 days of investigation, Eveline continued. He condemned me without hesitation because he trusted the system more than he trusted justice, and he was wrong. I was wrong, Alaric said loudly, standing. Lady Harrow is correct. I failed in my duty. I failed her. The chamber erupted in chaos. The Lord Chancellor banged his gavel repeatedly. Order, Duke Vane, you are not recognized. Then recognize me, Alaric said, because Lady Harrow's testimony implicates me as much as anyone. I was the weapon the conspirators used. I'm standing here to acknowledge that publicly. Eveline stared at him, shocked. This wasn't planned. This wasn't... Furthermore, Alaric continued, I move that Parliament reform the exile system, that all convictions be subject to mandatory review, that accused parties receive proper legal representation and the right to present evidence. Lady Harrow's case proves our current system is insufficient. That's highly irregular, the Lord Chancellor sputtered. So is framing innocent noblewomen, Alaric shot back. Scattered applause broke out in the gallery. The journalists scribbled frantically. This assembly will not be dictated to by the man who exposed the conspiracy? Eveline stood. By the Duke who risked his reputation to find the truth? If this assembly won't listen to him, then what good is it? More applause. Louder this time. Lord Ashford stood, his face red. This is a circus. You're both making a mockery of... We're making you uncomfortable, Eveline said coldly. There's a difference. You don't want to hear about the brutality of exile because then you'd have to acknowledge your role in it. You don't want reforms because then you'd have to admit the system you benefit from is corrupt. I will not be lectured by a woman who survived what you tried to bury? Eveline's voice rose. By someone who refuses to be silent and grateful? Too late, Lord Ashford. I'm here. I'm speaking. And I'm not going to stop. The gallery erupted in cheers. The Lord Chancellor gavelled desperately for order. When he finally achieved it, his expression was thunderous. Lady Harrow, Duke Vane, your testimonies are noted. This assembly will take your statements under advisement, but understand that your behavior today will have consequences. Good, Eveline said. Let there be consequences, as long as they lead to change. She was dismissed, but as she walked out, every person in the gallery stood. Spontaneous applause followed her through the halls. Reporters shouted questions. People reached out to touch her hand, to tell her she was brave, to thank her. Outside, a crowd had gathered. When Eveline emerged, they cheered. Alaric appeared at her side, his guards forming a protective circle. We need to get you somewhere safe. This could turn... Let them see me, Eveline said. She turned to the crowd. Thank you for your support. Thank you for believing in justice. Will you continue fighting? Someone shouted. Yes, Eveline said without hesitation. Until the system changes. Until no one else suffers what I suffered. More cheers. As the guards finally ushered her toward the carriage, a journalist pushed forward. Lady Harrow, one question. Do you forgive the Duke? Eveline froze. The entire crowd went silent, waiting. She looked at Alaric, standing tense beside her. His eyes met hers. Vulnerable, waiting, afraid of what she'd say. The Duke made a terrible mistake, Eveline said slowly. But he also had the courage to admit it, to investigate when no one else did, to risk everything to expose the truth. Do I forgive him? She paused. I don't know yet, but I respect what he's done to make amends. That's a start. The crowd murmured approval. Alaric's expression was unreadable, but Eveline saw his hands unclench slightly. In the carriage, they sat in silence until they were blocks away from Parliament. You didn't have to defend me, Alaric said finally. I wasn't defending you. I was telling the truth. Still, thank you. Eveline looked out the window at the London streets, so familiar yet foreign after months away. What you did in there, standing up, admitting fault publicly, that was reckless. It was necessary. It will cost you politically. I don't care. Alaric leaned forward. I'm tired of politics, tired of protecting systems that don't work. You were right. about all of it, and I'm done pretending otherwise. The king won't be happy. The king can deal with it. Alaric's jaw set. I'm through being his weapon, through convicting people without asking the right questions. If that costs me my position, so be it. Eveline studied him. You really have changed. You changed me. No, you changed yourself. I just survived. You did more than survive, Alaric said quietly. You showed me what integrity looks like, what strength really means. In the north, with nothing, you built something valuable, while I was here with everything and nearly destroyed an innocent life. That's not something I can forget. The carriage stopped at her townhouse. Eveline moved to exit, then paused. What you proposed in Parliament, the reforms, do you actually think they'll pass? Not without a fight. The old guard will resist. But with public pressure, with enough people demanding change, he met her eyes. With you leading that fight, I think we have a chance. Me? You're the face of this now, the symbol. People listened to you today. They believed you. You have power, Eveline. Use it. She shook her head slowly. I'm not a politician. Neither am I, apparently. But we can learn. Together, if you'll let me stand with you. Eveline wanted to say no, wanted to maintain the distance, keep him at arm's length where it was safe. But something in his expression, earnest, hopeful, completely without guile, made her hesitate. I'll think about it, she said finally. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was the first crack in her armor since she'd arrived in London. Over the next 3 days, Eveline became the center of a storm. Her testimony had been published in every major newspaper. Political cartoons showed her standing defiant before Parliament. People stopped her on the street to thank her, to share their own stories of injustice, to pledge support for reforms. Dinner invitations flooded in. She accepted the ones from political reformers and declined the society events. She met with lawyers drafting legislation. She spoke at a rally in Parliament Square, her words echoing across thousands of gathered citizens. The exile system is a weapon against the powerless, she told the crowd. It removes people without trial, without mercy, without hope of redemption. We must end it. We must demand justice, not just for me, but for every person who's been thrown away by this system. The crowd roared approval. Alaric stood at the edge, watching. He'd kept his distance as promised, but remained close enough to intervene if threats emerged. And threats were emerging. Angry letters, attempts to discredit Eveline, whispered campaigns from the old guard. But Eveline didn't flinch. She met every attack with truth, every lie with evidence. She was fearless in a way that made Alaric's chest ache with admiration and regret. On the 4th evening, she summoned him to the townhouse study. The king wants to see me, she said without preamble. Private audience, tomorrow morning. I'll accompany you. He specifically asked that I come alone. Eveline's expression was guarded. What do you think he wants? To contain you. You're making people uncomfortable, including him. Good. Eveline, Alaric said carefully, the king has the power to reverse your pardon, or make your life very difficult. You need to be strategic. I need to be honest. You can be both. She was quiet for a moment, then surprised him by asking, Will you help me prepare? I don't know the protocols for private audiences. I don't want to give him any excuse to dismiss me. Of course. They spent the evening reviewing proper forms of address, likely questions, how to navigate royal politics without compromising her positions. As they worked, Alaric was struck by how natural it felt, this collaboration, this shared purpose, almost like partnership. You're staring, Eveline said without looking up from her notes. Sorry, I was just thinking, this is the first time we've worked together without hostility. Don't get used to it, she said, but there was no heat in the words. Can I ask you something? Alaric ventured. Depends on the question. In Parliament, you said you didn't know if you forgave me. Do you think you ever will? Eveline set down her pen. I don't know. Forgiveness feels like something I should give because it's expected, because it makes a good story, the wronged woman who forgives her accuser and they move forward together. But real forgiveness isn't that simple. I'm not asking for a good story. I'm asking what you need. I need, Eveline said slowly, to trust you. And trust takes time. It takes consistent action, not grand gestures. It takes you proving, day after day, that you've actually changed, that you won't hurt me again. Then that's what I'll do, Alaric said, for as long as it takes. It might take years. I've got years. It might take forever. Then I'll spend forever earning it. Eveline looked at him, really looked, for the first time since he'd arrived in Greymont. She saw the shadows under his eyes from weeks of sleepless nights, the tension in his shoulders from carrying guilt, the sincerity in his expression. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why does my forgiveness matter so much to you?" Alaric was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "Because you're the only person who's ever shown me what I could be. Not what I was, the ruthless enforcer, the king's weapon, but what I could become if I chose differently. You survived exile with more honor than I showed with all my privilege. You built something meaningful from nothing. You didn't let injustice break you." He paused. "I want to be worthy of the woman you've become. Even if you can never forgive me, I want to be the person who deserves your respect." Eveline felt something shift in her chest, a wall crumbling, letting in dangerous, complicated light. "I can't promise forgiveness," she said, "but I can promise I'll let you try." It was the smallest opening, but it was enough. Alaric smiled, a real smile, the first she'd seen from him, and something warm and terrifying bloomed in Eveline's heart. She pushed it down, locked it away. This wasn't the time. She had a fight ahead, a system to change, a meeting with the king that could determine everything. But later, alone in her room, she let herself admit the truth. She was starting to believe in him, and that was the most dangerous thing of all. The king's private study was smaller than Eveline expected, intimate in a way that felt deliberately disarming. Morning light filtered through tall windows overlooking the palace gardens. His Majesty sat behind an ornate desk, dressed informally, a calculated show of approachability. "Lady Harrow," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Thank you for coming." Eveline curtsied properly and sat, keeping her spine straight. "Your Majesty." The king studied her for a long moment. "You've caused quite a stir." "I've told the truth, Your Majesty." "The truth," he repeated, "a dangerous commodity in politics. People prefer comfortable lies." "Then perhaps people need to become uncomfortable." A smile ghosted across his face. "Duke Vane warned me you'd be direct. I see he wasn't exaggerating." He leaned back. "I'll be equally direct. Your testimony has created a political crisis. The old guard is furious. They want you silenced. Some have suggested your pardon could be reconsidered." Eveline's blood went cold, but she kept her expression neutral. "On what grounds?" "Disrupting Parliament. Inciting unrest. There are always grounds if one looks hard enough." He paused. "However, I have no intention of reconsidering. You were wronged, Lady Harrow, terribly, and the public supports you overwhelmingly." "Then why this meeting?" "To propose a compromise. You want reforms. I need stability. We can give each other what we want, if we work together rather than in opposition." Eveline studied him carefully. This was the trap. The offer that sounded reasonable but required her to soften, to compromise, to become manageable. "What kind of compromise?" she asked. "You continue advocating for reform, but through proper channels. Private meetings, not public rallies. Working with Parliament, not against it. In exchange, I'll personally sponsor the reform legislation. With my backing, it will pass. And if I refuse, then you'll fight alone. The old guard will oppose you at every turn. Reforms will die in committee. You'll exhaust yourself battling a system designed to outlast rebels." His expression softened. "I'm not your enemy, Lady Harrow. I want the same things you do, but change requires patience, strategy, compromise." It was a good argument, logical, reasonable, and everything in Eveline's gut told her it was wrong. "Your Majesty," she said slowly, 8 months ago, I stood in a ballroom and begged for mercy. For someone to listen, to question, to give me a chance. No one did. The system you're asking me to work within is the same system that destroyed me. Why should I trust it now?" "Because now you have power," the king said. "Public support. Political capital, the moral high ground. Use them wisely. I am using them. By refusing to be silent. By making people uncomfortable. Eveline leaned forward. Your Majesty, the reforms won't happen through quiet channels. They'll happen because people demand them. Because they see what happened to me and realize it could happen to anyone. Fear of public anger is the only thing that will force real change. The king's expression hardened. You're playing a dangerous game. I'm fighting a necessary war, and if I withdraw my support, if I let the old guard come for you, then they come. Eveline's voice was steady. But I won't stop. I'll keep speaking, keep fighting, because someone has to, and I've already survived the worst they can do to me. Silence stretched between them. The king's eyes narrowed, reassessing. Duke Vane said you'd become formidable, he said finally. I thought he was being poetic. I see now he was simply accurate. Does that mean you'll oppose me? It means, the king said, I'll stay out of your way. I won't sponsor the reforms, but I won't actively block them either. You want to fight this battle on your terms? So be it. But understand, if you fail, the consequences are yours alone. It wasn't support. It wasn't. But it was permission. I accept those terms, Eveline said. The king nodded slowly. You're either very brave or very foolish. I've been called both. She stood. Will that be all, Your Majesty? One more thing. He pulled a document from his desk. I'm officially restoring your father's shipping company to your control. The consortium that tried to steal it has been dissolved. You're now one of the wealthiest women in England. Eveline took the document, her hands trembling slightly. The company her father had built. The thing they'd destroyed her to acquire. Use it well, the king said. Money is power, perhaps more than titles or positions. As Eveline left the palace, her mind raced. She'd gambled everything on that meeting, refusing to compromise, rejecting the easy path. It could have gone badly. He could have turned on her, but she'd won. Not completely, but enough. Alaric waited in the courtyard, pacing. When he saw her, relief flooded his face. Well, he's staying neutral. I'm on my own. That's actually better than I expected. Alaric fell into step beside her. What happened in there? She told him about the conversation, the offered compromise, her refusal. As she spoke, she watched his reactions, expecting disapproval or concern. Instead, he smiled. What? She asked. You're magnificent, Alaric said simply. A year ago, you would have taken that compromise. It was safe, logical, but now you know your own power. You know what you're worth. It's a risk. The best things are. He paused. For what it's worth, I'll support whatever you decide, publicly or privately, whatever you need. Eveline studied him. The man who'd condemned her now stood ready to follow her lead. The shift in their dynamic was dizzying. I need, she said carefully, to go back north. Alaric blinked. What? Before I fight this battle, before I push for reforms, I need to go back to Greymont, to finish what I started. Those children deserve more than a rushed goodbye. The village deserves to know I didn't abandon them. When do we leave? The automatic "we" made her chest tighten. This isn't your fight. Everything you do is my fight now, Alaric said quietly. If you'll have me. Eveline wanted to say no, wanted to maintain independence, prove she didn't need him. But the truth was becoming harder to deny. She didn't need him, but she wanted him there. 2 days, she said. We leave in 2 days. News of their return spread through Greymont before the carriage even arrived. By the time they reached the village square, half the population had gathered. Children broke free from their parents and ran toward Eveline, shouting her name. She dropped to her knees and let them swarm her, hugging, crying, asking if she was staying forever. Not forever, she said, her voice thick, but for a little while, long enough to make sure your education continues. Thomas Breen pushed through the crowd, grinning. Heard you turned Parliament upside down. About time someone did. I had a good teacher, Eveline said, gesturing to the village around her. You all taught me how to fight. Margaret Whitfield appeared with tears streaming down her weathered face. We thought you'd forgotten about us. Never. Eveline hugged her fiercely. This place saved my life. These people saved me. I could never forget that. Over the next week, Eveline threw herself into finishing what she'd started. She held classes every day, working with the children to ensure they could continue learning independently. She helped Thomas draft a charter for a permanent school, complete with funding from her newly restored fortune. "You don't have to do this," Thomas said as they reviewed the documents. "You've given enough." "I'm not giving, I'm investing," Eveline smiled. "These children are brilliant. Given the chance, they'll change the world. I want to be part of that." She also met with every family in the village, listening to their stories, their struggles, their hopes. She took notes, asked questions, learned about the systems that kept them trapped in poverty. Alaric worked beside her, never pushing, never demanding attention. He repaired buildings. He helped with the late harvest. He played games with the children, teaching them things he'd learned as a boy. The villagers, initially suspicious, began to warm to him. One evening, Eveline found him sitting with old Jacob Whitfield, discussing crop rotation strategies. "Duke's not what I expected," Jacob said later. "Thought he'd be all high and mighty, but he listens, learns, doesn't pretend to know everything." "He's changed," Eveline admitted. "Because of you," Margaret said, joining them. "Anyone can see it. The way he looks at you. That's not just guilt, girl. That's something deeper." Eveline's chest tightened. "I can't think about that." "Why not?" "Because I'm still angry, still hurt, still—" She broke off. "Because forgiving him feels like betraying myself, like saying what he did was acceptable." "Forgiveness isn't about him," Margaret said gently. "It's about you, about whether you want to carry that anger forever or set it down. What if I set it down and he hurts me again? What if you don't and spend your life wondering what might have been?" The question haunted Eveline as the days passed. She watched Alaric, how gentle he was with the children, how respectful with the villagers, how careful never to overstep boundaries with her. He was proving himself through actions, just as he'd promised, and slowly, terrifyingly, her walls were crumbling. One night, unable to sleep, Eveline walked to the old schoolroom. She found Alaric there, sitting in the darkness. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. He turned, surprised. "I was just thinking about the children, about what you've built here. It's extraordinary." She sat beside him. "I couldn't have done it without the village, without people taking a chance on me. They took a chance because you earned it, because you proved yourself worthy of trust. Is that what you're trying to do? Prove yourself?" "Every day," Alaric said quietly. "I don't know if I'll ever succeed, but I have to try." Eveline looked at him. Really looked, at the man who'd once seemed made of ice and iron, now revealed as flesh and blood and regret. At the Duke who'd humbled himself to help in a village he'd never cared about before. At the person who'd broken everything to learn how to value her. "You asked me once if I'd ever forgive you," she said softly. Alaric's breath caught. "I remember. I think—" She paused, choosing words carefully. "I think I'm starting to. Not completely, not easily, but the anger is fading, and in its place there's something else." "What?" "Possibility." She met his eyes. "The possibility that we could be something other than victim and destroyer, that we could build something new from the ruins." "Like what?" His voice was barely a whisper. "I don't know yet. Partnership, maybe. Friendship. Something earned rather than given." She reached out tentatively and took his hand. "But I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise you'll keep proving yourself. Not with grand gestures, but with daily choices. With respect and honesty and patience. Because if we're going to do this, whatever this is, I need to know you'll stay when things get hard." "I promise," Alaric said, his grip tightening. "I'll stay through everything, the hard days and the good ones. The anger and the healing, all of it." Eveline nodded slowly. Then, in a moment of reckless courage, she leaned forward and kissed him. It was brief, barely more than a brush of lips, but it felt like a door opening, like a choice made. When she pulled back, Alaric's eyes were wide with wonder. "That wasn't forgiveness," Eveline said quickly. "Not yet, but it was a beginning," Alaric finished. "I'll take it." They sat in the darkness, hands linked, both understanding that this was fragile and complicated and might break 1,000 times before it healed. But for the first time since that terrible night in the ballroom, Eveline felt something other than anger when she looked at him. She felt hope. They returned to London 2 weeks later with a plan. Eveline used her restored fortune to establish an education fund, not just for Greymont, but for every northern village. She hired teachers, bought supplies, funded school buildings. It was a direct challenge to the system that had tried to destroy her, proving that the same wealth they'd coveted could be used to uplift the people they'd ignored. She also continued her political campaign. She spoke at rallies, wrote opinion pieces, met with reform-minded parliament members. Slowly, support built. The exile reform bill gained sponsors. Public pressure mounted. Alaric stood beside her through it all, not as her savior or protector, but as her partner. He used his political connections to open doors. He defended her in private meetings. He learned to step back and let her lead, offering support without overshadowing. They faced opposition at every turn. The old guard fought viciously. They tried to discredit Eveline, claiming she was too emotional, too radical, too dangerous. They accused Alaric of betraying his position, of abandoning duty for sentiment. But public opinion had turned. People saw Eveline as a symbol of resilience and justice. They saw Alaric as someone brave enough to admit fault and change. 6 months after Eveline's testimony, the Exile Reform Act passed Parliament. It mandated proper trials for all accused. It required legal representation. It established oversight committees. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. The day the king signed it into law, Eveline stood in the palace courtyard surrounded by supporters. When asked how she felt, she spoke from the heart. "This law won't undo what happened to me. It won't give me back the months I lost. But it means that the next person falsely accused will have protections I didn't. They'll have a fighting chance. That's worth everything I went through." Afterward, Alaric found her in a quiet corner of the palace gardens. "You did it," he said. "You changed the system." "We did it?" Eveline corrected. "I couldn't have gotten this far without your support." "You could have. You're strong enough to do anything." "Maybe, but I didn't have to do it alone. That matters." They walked through the gardens as the sun set over London. 8 months had passed since the night everything had shattered. 8 months of pain, growth, struggle, and slow healing. "Can I ask you something?" Alaric said. "Always." "That night in Greymont, when you kissed me, you said it wasn't forgiveness. What was it?" Eveline was quiet for a moment. "It was acceptance. Of what happened, of what we'd become, of the possibility that we could be more. Forgiveness is still—" She paused. "It's still hard. Some days I wake up angry all over again. Some days I look at you and still see the man who destroyed me. I understand. But most days," she continued, "I see the man who spent months proving he'd changed, who fought beside me, who never gave up even when I pushed him away. That man I can forgive. I'm choosing to forgive." Alaric stopped walking. "Choosing?" "Forgiveness isn't a feeling," Eveline said. "It's a choice. And I'm choosing you. Not because you deserve it. Maybe you never will. But because holding on to anger was killing me. Because you've earned a chance. Because—" Her voice softened. "Because when I imagine my future, I want you in it." "Eveline." Her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "I love you. I've loved you since I watched you stand in that village square and refuse to give up. Since I saw the woman you became, fierce and unbreakable, and more honorable than anyone I've ever known. I love you, and I'll spend the rest of my life being worthy of that love." Tears slipped down Eveline's cheeks. "I love you too." Which is terrifying and probably insane, but it's true. I love the man you've become. The one who learned to question authority and fight for what's right. The one who chose to change rather than stay comfortable. He pulled her close, and she let him, let herself be held, let herself feel safe in arms that once symbolized her destruction. It was the final wall crumbling, the final step in a long, brutal journey from victim to survivor to victor. "What happens now?" Alaric asked against her hair. "Now we keep fighting," Eveline said. "There's still so much wrong with the system, so many people who need help. The education fund is just the beginning. I want to create safe houses for exiles, legal defense funds, programs to help people rebuild. I'm with you, Alaric said immediately. I know. She pulled back to look at him. And that's why this works, because you don't try to lead me or protect me from the fight. You stand beside me. You let me be strong. You are strong. You always were. I was just too blind to see it. You see it now. That's what matters. They stood in the garden as night fell over London. Two people who'd destroyed and been destroyed, who'd found each other again in the wreckage and built something new. Something earned through pain and growth and the slow, deliberate work of healing. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There would be hard days ahead. Moments when old wounds reopened. Arguments and doubts and struggles to navigate a relationship built on such complicated history. But it was real. And it was theirs. 1 year later, Eveline stood in a newly constructed schoolhouse in Greymont, watching children file in for the first day of classes. The building was beautiful. Large windows, proper desks, shelves full of books. Everything she'd dreamed of when she'd taught in the cramped tavern corner. Thomas Breen stood beside her, his expression proud. Never thought I'd see this. A real school, full-time teachers, all because you wouldn't give up. All because a village took a chance on a disgraced exile, Eveline corrected. You saved me, Thomas. All of you did. We helped each other. That's what community means. Alaric appeared in the doorway, slightly out of breath. Sorry I'm late. Parliament ran long. He'd given up his position as chief enforcer, taking instead a role as reform advocate. It paid less and carried less prestige, but it aligned with who he'd become. You're just in time, Eveline said, looping her arm through his. They're about to start. The teacher, a young woman from London whom Eveline had hired, called the students to attention. Eveline recognized several faces from her original classes. They'd grown taller, more confident, hungry for knowledge. As the lesson began, Alaric leaned close. I have something to ask you. Now? Can it wait? It's waited long enough. He pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside was a simple ring, no ostentatious jewels, just elegant craftsmanship. Eveline's breath caught. I know we've discussed this, Alaric said quietly, and I know you value your independence. This isn't about ownership or control. It's about partnership, about choosing to build a life together. So, Lady Eveline Harrow, extraordinary woman who rebuilt herself from nothing, who changed a system and saved countless lives. Will you marry me? Eveline looked at the ring, at Alaric's hopeful face, at the schoolroom full of children who existed because she'd survived and fought and refused to stay broken. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the exile that had shattered her old life, the months of brutal survival, the slow rebuilding, the decision to fight rather than accept, the man who'd destroyed everything and then spent a year proving he could be different. It wasn't the life she'd planned. It was better, harder, more complicated, but infinitely more meaningful. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. Alaric slipped the ring on her finger, and they kissed as the children's voices rose in recitation behind them, reading, learning, growing. Outside, the northern wind carried the scent of approaching winter, but inside the schoolhouse there was warmth and light and possibility. Eveline had been cast out, condemned, nearly destroyed. She'd survived against all odds. She'd built something from nothing. She'd changed the world and reclaimed her power. And in the end, she'd found something she'd never expected. Love. Not the easy kind, but the kind forged in fire and proved through action. The kind that earned trust day by day. She looked at Alaric, at the man who'd had to break everything to learn how to value her, and smiled. They would keep fighting, keep building, keep changing the world together, because that's what survivors did. They didn't just endure, they transformed. And Eveline Harrow, once branded a traitor and cast into exile, now stood as proof that the worst destruction could lead to the most powerful rebirth. The woman the court had tried to erase had returned, not as a victim, but as a force that would reshape the kingdom itself. And she was only just beginning.